When Gerald Flint started digging a hole in his backyard in rural Montana, his neighbors thought he'd lost his mind. A barn underground? For horses? The guy must have inhaled too much hay dust. Then the blizzard of 1978 hit. Temperatures dropped to 50 below zero, and every barn in the county became a frozen tomb. Except his. Keep watching, because this story gets better. Let's set the scene. It's 1975. Gerald Flint is a horse breeder in northeastern Montana, about 40 miles from the Canadian border. This is not the friendly part of Montana you see in tourism ads. This is the part where winter doesn't knock politely. It kicks your door down, moves into your house, and stays for 6 months. Wind chills that make your eyeballs hurt. Snow that buries fence posts. The kind of cold that'll freeze diesel fuel solid in your truck. Gerald had been raising quarter horses for 15 years at this point. Good bloodlines, championship stock, animals worth serious money. But every single winter was a gamble. He'd lose at least one horse, sometimes more. Pneumonia, colic brought on by stress, injuries from slipping on ice, or sometimes they'd just give up when the temperature hit a certain point. Horses are tough animals, but they're not indestructible. The problem was the barns. Traditional barns in Montana are built the same way they've been built for 150 years. 4 walls, a roof, maybe some insulation if you're fancy. They keep the wind out mostly. They keep the snow off the horses usually, but they don't keep the cold out. Not really. When it's 30 below outside, it might be 10 below inside the barn. That's still cold enough to kill. Gerald tried everything. More insulation, space heaters, which were expensive and a fire hazard. Heat lamps, same problem. Blankets on every horse, which helped but wasn't enough. He'd spend entire winters essentially camping in the barn, checking on horses every few hours, making sure water wasn't frozen, that everyone was still breathing. It was exhausting, and it wasn't sustainable. So he started thinking. And this is where it gets interesting because Gerald wasn't some crazy eccentric with more money than sense. He was a practical farmer who'd grown up on that land. But he'd also spent time in the military, stationed in Korea, and he'd seen something there that stuck with him. Underground shelters, bunkers, places where the earth itself provided insulation. The idea sat in his brain for months. What if you didn't fight the Montana winter? What if you just avoided it entirely? What if you went underground? He started researching. This was 1975, remember? No internet, no YouTube tutorials. He went to the library. He talked to mining engineers. He found studies about earth temperature, about how once you get below the frost line, the ground stays a relatively constant temperature year-round. In Montana, that's about 50 degrees Fahrenheit once you're deep enough. 50 degrees doesn't sound warm. But compared to 50 below zero, it's tropical. And for horses, 50 degrees is actually ideal. Not too hot, not too cold. They're comfortable at that temperature. They don't stress. Their immune systems work properly. They don't burn through calories just trying to stay warm. Gerald did the math. A traditional heated barn would cost him thousands in heating bills every winter, assuming the heaters worked and didn't burn the place down. An underground barn would cost nothing to heat because the earth would do it for free. The initial construction would be expensive, sure, but over time it would pay for itself. His wife thought he was out of his mind. His neighbors were less polite about it. You're going to bury horses alive? What happens when it collapses? How are they going to get sunlight? The criticism was relentless, but Gerald had made up his mind. In spring of 1976, he started digging. And when I say digging, I mean he excavated a hole 30 feet deep, 60 feet long, and 40 feet wide. That's not a barn. That's a cavern. He couldn't do it by hand, obviously. He hired excavation equipment, bulldozers, and backhoes. The whole process took 3 months and cost more money than he wanted to think about. But here's where Gerald's military experience came in handy. He understood structural engineering better than your average rancher. The walls weren't just dirt. He built retaining walls from concrete blocks, reinforced with rebar. The ceiling was constructed from massive wooden beams, the kind they use for bridge construction, overlaid with sheet metal, and then covered with 3 feet of earth. The entrance was a ramp, gentle enough for horses to walk down without panicking, leading to a large door that sealed tight. Inside, he built stalls along both walls, 12 of them total. Each stall was spacious, bigger than a traditional stall actually. In the center was a wide corridor where horses could be led in and out, where equipment could be moved. Ventilation was critical. You can't just seal horses underground, they need fresh air. Gerald installed a ventilation system with intake and exhaust pipes that ran up through the earth to the surface. The pipes were wide, about a foot in diameter, and positioned to create natural airflow. Warm air rises, cold air sinks. The system worked without electricity, though he installed fans as backup. Lighting was another challenge. He ran electrical lines underground, installed fluorescent lights throughout the space. It wasn't natural sunlight, but it was bright enough. And here's the thing people don't realize. Horses don't need sunlight the way humans do. They need light to maintain their circadian rhythm, but artificial light works fine for that. Water was surprisingly easy. He drilled a well directly in the underground barn. The water table in that area was high, only about 40 feet down. He installed a pump and suddenly he had running water underground. Heated by the earth, never freezing. That alone was revolutionary. In a traditional barn, water freezes constantly. You're breaking ice out of buckets 3 times a day. Gerald's horses would have liquid water all winter. The floor was interesting. He didn't pour concrete. Instead, he laid down a thick layer of gravel for drainage, then covered it with sand, then topped it with rubber mats. The result was a floor that was soft on horse legs, excellent for drainage, and surprisingly warm to stand on. By fall of 1976, the underground barn was complete. Gerald moved his horses in, and the neighbors came by to gawk. Some were impressed despite themselves. Others were waiting for disaster. "Wait till winter," they said. "Those horses will go crazy being underground. They'll panic. You'll lose them all." Winter came. November brought the first serious cold snap. Temperatures outside dropped to 15 below. In the underground barn, 48 degrees. Gerald couldn't believe it. He'd hoped for 40, maybe 45, but 48? That was perfect. The horses were comfortable. More than comfortable. They were thriving. December was colder. Outside temperatures hit 30 below. Inside the barn, 47 degrees. Barely a change. The earth was doing exactly what Gerald had hoped. It was acting like a massive battery, storing heat in summer and releasing it slowly in winter. The horses adapted faster than anyone expected. There was no panic, no stress behavior. They ate normally, slept normally, interacted normally. If anything, they seemed more relaxed than in previous winters. No wind howling outside. No drafts. No sudden temperature changes. Just consistent, comfortable conditions. Gerald's heating bill that winter was exactly $0. His neighbors, the ones running space heaters and heat lamps around the clock, were paying hundreds. Some of them started asking questions. How much did it cost to build? How hard was it? Could they see inside? But the real test came in January 1978. That's when the blizzard hit, and when I say blizzard, I'm talking about the kind of storm that makes the news 40 years later. The kind weather historians write papers about. It started on January 6th and lasted 4 days. Wind speeds over 70 miles per hour. Snowfall measured in feet per hour, not inches. Wind chills hit 80 below zero in some areas. This wasn't just Montana either. The storm system stretched from Texas to Canada, from Colorado to Minnesota. It killed 70 people. It stranded thousands. It collapsed buildings under the weight of snow. Livestock across the region froze to death by the thousands. Cattle, sheep, horses, it didn't matter. If you were outside, you died. If you were in a regular barn, you might die. Gerald watched the weather reports and knew it was coming. He made sure all his horses were underground. He stocked up on feed. He checked the ventilation system. And then he waited. The blizzard hit like a freight train. The wind was so loud you couldn't hear yourself think. Snow piled up so fast that fences disappeared. The temperature dropped to 45 below, and that was before factoring in wind chill. Power lines came down across the county. Gerald's house lost power on day 2. His neighbors were in survival mode. They were trying to keep their own houses warm, never mind the barns. Some of them tried to move horses into their houses or garages. Others wrapped them in every blanket they owned and prayed. A few gave up entirely and just hoped for the best. Gerald went out to check the underground barn, fighting through chest-deep snow to reach the entrance. The door was partially buried. He dug it out, pulled it open, and went down the ramp. Inside, it was perfectly calm. The horses looked up at him like he was interrupting their nap. The temperature? 46 degrees. Outside, people were dying. Animals were freezing solid where they stood, and Gerald's horses were standing in their stalls, comfortable and completely unaffected. The ventilation system was working fine. The lights were on, running off a backup generator he'd installed. Water was flowing. Everything was fine. He stayed down there for a while, just watching the horses, hardly believing it himself. The storm raging above them might as well have been happening on another planet. Down here, it was quiet, peaceful, safe. The blizzard finally ended on January 9th. The aftermath was catastrophic. The county lost over 60% of its livestock. Barns had collapsed under snow weight. Animals that survived the cold starved because people couldn't get feed to them through the drifts. The financial damage ran into the millions for the county alone. Gerald lost nothing. Every single one of his horses survived without even a sniffle. They hadn't experienced a single moment of stress or discomfort during the worst blizzard in Montana history. When the neighbors finally dug themselves out and came to check on him, expecting to help with dead horses, they found him leading perfectly healthy animals up the ramp for exercise. The story spread fast. Local news picked it up, then regional news. By March, Gerald was doing interviews for agricultural magazines. Other ranchers started showing up, asking for tours, taking measurements, asking how much it cost and how long it took. The underground barn went from being a local joke to being a local legend. But here's where the story gets really interesting. You'd think everyone would immediately start building underground barns, right? It worked. It was proven. It saved lives and money. But that's not what happened. Most ranchers looked at the upfront cost and said no thanks. Building an underground barn in 1976 cost Gerald about $45,000. That's roughly $240,000 in today's money. For most small ranchers, that was an impossible sum. They couldn't get loans for something that experimental. Banks didn't want to finance it. Insurance companies didn't know how to rate it. There was also the psychological factor. Ranchers are traditional people. They build barns the way their fathers and grandfathers built barns. The idea of putting animals underground felt wrong to a lot of them, even after seeing proof it worked. It was too different, too weird, too much of a departure from how things had always been done. A few people did build underground barns. 3 ranchers in Montana built them within 2 years, a couple in Wyoming, one in North Dakota, but it never became widespread. The upfront cost and the psychological barrier were too much. Gerald didn't care. His barn worked. That was all that mattered to him. He used it for the next 30 years. Every winter, while his neighbors fought the cold, his horses were comfortable. His heating costs stayed at 0. He never lost another horse to winter weather. The barn paid for itself within a decade just from saved heating costs and livestock that stayed healthy. There were unexpected benefits too. In summer, when temperatures outside hit 95 degrees, the underground barn stayed cool, around 55 degrees. Horses that might have suffered heat stress in a traditional barn were comfortable underground. The barn worked year-round, not just in winter. The ventilation system proved to be better than traditional barns too. In a regular barn, ammonia from urine builds up, especially in winter when you keep everything sealed up to preserve heat. That ammonia causes respiratory problems in horses. But Gerald's ventilation system, with its constant air exchange, kept ammonia levels low. His horses had fewer respiratory infections than horses in traditional barns. The structural integrity held up perfectly. No collapses, no water seepage, no problems with the retaining walls. Gerald had built it right the first time. The wooden beams showed some aging after 20 years, but nothing serious. The concrete was fine. The whole structure could probably last a century with basic maintenance. Other farmers who visited noticed something else interesting. The horses coming out of Gerald's underground barn were calmer than typical horses. They weren't skittish. They didn't spook easily. Some horse trainers theorized that the consistent, quiet environment made them more stable psychologically. No sudden noises from wind or thunder. No dramatic temperature swings. Just calm, consistent conditions day after day. Gerald eventually sold the property in 2006. He was getting older, ready to retire. The new owners, a younger couple also raising horses, bought it specifically because of the underground barn. They'd heard the stories. They knew the history. They wanted that same advantage. The barn is still in use today, still working exactly as designed, still maintaining that perfect 45 to 50 degree temperature year-round, still protecting horses from Montana winters that would kill them in a traditional barn. So what's the lesson here? I mean, besides the obvious fact that Gerald was way ahead of his time, the lesson is that sometimes the crazy idea is actually the smart idea. Sometimes building something differently, even when everyone tells you you're wrong, is exactly what you should do. Gerald looked at a problem. Traditional barns don't work in extreme cold, and he solved it in a way nobody had considered. He didn't try to heat a barn better. He didn't try to insulate more. He changed the entire approach. He used the earth itself as climate control. And here's the thing that really gets me. This technology isn't new. Humans have been building underground for climate control for thousands of years. Root cellars stay cool in summer and don't freeze in winter using the exact same principle. Native Americans in the Great Plains built earth lodges that stayed comfortable year-round. Gerald didn't invent anything. He just applied old knowledge in a new way. The fact that underground barns didn't catch on everywhere says more about human psychology than it does about the idea's merit. People resist change. They especially resist expensive change. And they really resist change that seems weird or unconventional, even when it's proven to work. But for Gerald Flint, sitting in his underground barn while a blizzard raged above, watching his healthy horses munch hay in perfect comfort, none of that mattered. He'd built something that worked. He'd proven everyone wrong. And he'd saved his animals' lives in the process. The neighbors who called him crazy in 1975? By 1979, they weren't laughing anymore. They were asking for blueprints. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button. More interesting tales coming soon.